Why do you know so much about the Titanic?
Well, first of all, I don't have like a PhD in Titanic studies or anything. I've just kind of become obsessed with it over time. I have no idea why. I'm just totally fascinated by it. I love the whole vibe of ocean liners. I love ships.
Yeah.
And just the whole thing about the Titanic, once I started looking into it, things were just not adding up to me. And the more I looked into it, the less things added up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so many unanswered questions about it, which, frankly, I don't think we will ever know what actually happened, since one ship is in the bottom of the Atlantic and the other one is scrapped, since there were actually three ships, three sister ships, and two of them sank, one of them got scrapped, so we'll just never know what really happened.
Huh. Okay, so
What's the official narrative, I guess, huh?
First of all, tell us the official narrative, and then what's wrong with the narrative.
So the official narrative is that there were the two main sister ships, the Olympic and the Titanic. The Titanic was the one that we've heard the most about, mainly because, one, it sank, and two, there's a Hollywood movie about it. It sank on the night of April 14th, 1912, and it sank under mysterious circumstances, but it seems like a total freak accident. It crashed into an iceberg, and the iceberg hit the ship at the wrong spot, and the unsinkable ship sank, killing about 1,500 people. So that's the official narrative. There's a lot wrong with it. There's just way too many unanswered questions. One of the main weird things about it is that in 1898, there was a book written called Futility, or Wreck of the Titan, which basically outlines exactly what happened to the Titanic 14 years before it actually happened. It's this unsinkable ocean liner called the Titan that hits an iceberg at midnight in the middle of the Atlantic, like some 100 miles off the coast of Canada, which is exactly what happened to the Titanic.
Wait, what happened to the guy who wrote that total work of fiction?
Okay, so first off, the guy who wrote it said that all the information came to him in a psychic vision. And then in 1915, he's found dead in his hotel room from a supposed overdose. But it kind of just seems like he was unalived for some reason.
Unalived.
Weird. Okay, so he wrote a book in 1898 that was very much like what actually happened 14 years later to the actual Titanic.
Yeah.
And then he turned up dead 3 years later, 3 years after the Titanic sunk.
Yes. And if you look into the book, the similarities between the Titan and the Titanic are absolutely unreal. Like the size of the ship and the lack of lifeboats, the speed at which the ship goes, the month it sank in April, the side of the ship that the iceberg hit, which is on the starboard side, the right side, it hits the ship at midnight. The actual Titanic was going from England to New York. In the book, it was going from New York to England. So it's just stuff like that it's too much to be a coincidence.
But in the fictional account, the writer says that it happened, the iceberg was struck near midnight. Well, the Titanic struck the iceberg at 11:40, so 20 minutes earlier than the guy said.
That's a big difference.
So that's a big difference.
I'm glad you pointed out that inconsistency in her theory there.
Yeah, we don't want to get crazy here. It's like people say Nostradamus predicted Hitler, when no, he predicted Hissler. That's not the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not the same
Good
guy.
call, Pat.
Also, the first warning of danger was similar. The ship's headquarters was similar. The ship's owner's office location, the same. The size of the ship was the same. The horsepower was very, very similar. The length was almost the same.
The name was almost the same.
Yeah, Titan and Titanic. It's bizarre. That's really something.
Okay, so let's just say that that they got the inspiration from the book, and they were like, "We're gonna sink a ship." Like, what would be the reason for that? I mean, do we have a?
Yeah, do you have a working theory on that?
Why are we doing that?
I mean, there's a lot of books that kind of predict the future. Like there's just a lot. There's one book, I forgot the name of it, that predicts a President Obomi.
What? Really?
Yeah, and then there's another one which was actually written by a Nazi physicist, I think, a rocket scientist, that predicts a man named Elon leading a colony of humans to Mars.
Gosh.
So things like this happen. I'm not sure if it's like a soft disclosure. And I don't really have a huge theory on it.
Yeah. So who was on this ship that you would want to sink it? I think that's probably what pulls me in the most to this possibly being, and that's not even getting to it not being the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic. It's we can get to that in a moment, but let's just talk about who was on this ship that you would want to not get to their destination.
So the creation of the Federal Reserve is kind of why the Titanic was sunk. If it's a theory, I can't say exactly like this is definitely why it happened, but there were 3 main opposition to the Federal Reserve. Well, 4, but one of them was basically bought off with $2 million. But in the early 1900s, $2 million was a lot of money. So on the Titanic, there was John Jacob Astor, who at the time was one of the wealthiest people in the world, and I think the wealthiest in the U.S. There was Benjamin Guggenheim, and there was Isidor Straus, the owner of Macy's department store. And they were opposed to the creation of a central bank because they made their money not from banking and finance, but more like retail stuff and real estate. So they knew that if there was a central bank, it would slowly take over all of their business and they would lose a lot of their fortune. So it was not like this altruistic thing of like, we're thinking about the people and their wealth. No, they're thinking about their own, which is why they were opposed to it. So getting rid of those people would allow a central bank to be created. And the timing of that really works out because exactly a year after the Titanic sinks, finally the US is able to create a central bank.
Literally in 1913 that happened. The Titanic sunk in 1912. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. And without those influential people opposing it, maybe they had a clearer path to creating this thing. So that's an interesting theory. There's also a theory, though, that the ship was switched.
So there's some evidence is a weird word to use for this, but there's signs that point to the ships actually being switched. But it is also very possible that the switch didn't really happen, and it's kind of like a psyop to take away from the main point of the ship being deliberately sunk.
Because of the Federal Reserve thing?
Yeah.
There's that word again, too. It trips up everybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so
we have pictures, right? Don't we have a picture of like comparing the Titanic to what it looked like before it sunk, and what it actually looks like?
Yeah. The thing is, though, that there is some conflicting information about the way the ships look. They're virtually identical, but a lot of people use the example of one of the ships having 16 portholes, the other one having 14, but that can easily be explained. I mean, not to poke holes in the theory, but the window thing, the porthole thing, the windows can be added for extra ventilation and stuff. And there are visual differences in the ships too. Like one of the ships has an open promenade on B deck, I think. The other one does not. But again, those things can kind of be explained. And also, okay, here's one thing that kind of may point to the ships being switched. Right after the Titanic sank, the Olympic was pulled from service in October 1912 and basically completely refitted, and a lot of things that were on the Titanic but not on the Olympic were added to the Olympic. So why would they do that? So after the refitting, the ships were actually the same.
Weird.
So they didn't look identical until after the fact.
And they basically looked identical except for a few minor differences. One of them being the Turkish bath. Both ships had a Turkish bath. One of the layouts were a little different. And on the maiden voyage of the Titanic, the Turkish baths were closed until the day it sank. So it was doing its voyage for 4 days before it sank. The Turkish bath was closed the entire time except the last day. And it was only open to first class, which means only a few people saw it.
So it would be easier, right, in 1912 to pull off this cover-up as opposed to today, right? I mean, because there's no internet, there's no TV, there's no press hanging around. So
yeah, and people were more likely to believe what they were told.
Yeah, that's true.